So I would like to invite Matt Cohen to present now. As I mentioned, I've known Matt for quite a couple of years, and I was impressed on first date, as they say. And I've consulted with him in multiple things, but he's always been very impressive because he can speak freely about deep tech and the legal aspects as well. Matt, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate you all for coming by. As Henrik mentioned, my name is Matt Cohen. I'm an attorney. I run the corporate and business transactions practice group at Zebersky Payne Shaw Lewenz up in Fort Lauderdale. This presentation here, I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about myself and the firm, but then we're ultimately going to talk about some interesting issues at the intersection of blockchain and AI, which we'll dive into in just a moment. So first, a couple minutes, or a couple seconds about me. I'm a corporate and securities lawyer by trade. So my firm is a full-service firm. Virtually any legal situation you find yourself into, there's probably somebody who can help. From my side of the office, I handle all the boardroom stuff and none of the courtroom stuff. So under my purview is the corporate and business transactions practice, and that's everything from representing startups doing capital raises. We'll represent the buy side there as well, so a lot of venture funds, family offices, people doing direct investments. We do a lot of fund formation. My particular bread and butter is middle market M&A, so I do both buy and sell side there. I work with a lot of private equity sponsors, independent sponsors, you name it. And then we will also have a real estate component, so everything from leasing through development, construction, closings, you name it. So think about any time a large sum of money is changing hands, or it's an important contract that you're signing with a customer or a vendor or an investor, that's usually where our expertise comes into play. And we're relatively industry agnostic. So for my part, I got my start, and where I met Henrik was working in the payments and blockchain space. I was sort of an early adopter of some of the more interesting, I think, blockchain technologies, and was along for the ride as that thing developed into Web3 and tokenization and everything else. Have done a lot of work in what they call traditional finance, registered investment advisors, your traditional money managers, that sort of thing. In my spare time, I co-founded in 2016 an outfit called Stratum Capital Group, along with one of my law partners and some others. That's a private equity real estate firm. Focuses primarily on value-add investments. We've got a portfolio of investments everywhere from South Miami up through New Jersey, and recently got into a little bit more of the pure private equity side, and we're working on a roll-up in the healthcare and vitality space. So if it's ever of interest to you guys, would love to chat with you about it. So besides wearing too many hats, I do get to sit at the intersection in my law practice of some very interesting issues. I don't profess to be an expert at AI. There's a handful of people who are, and if you watch the news, they all resigned from OpenAI yesterday. It's a fascinating field, and it brings up a lot of very unique things in the legal space, just because of the sheer amount of areas and issues that it touches. So if you are a lawyer, right, we tend to have specialties. I'm a little bit unusual in the sense that I'm a little bit broad, just because I've seen and done a lot of unusual things in my time. But a lot of people are hyper-focused. Either they're data privacy lawyers, they litigate partnership disputes, they're intellectual property lawyers. You could talk to any one of those people about AI, and it's going to mean something different to them, and the blood is going to run from your lawyer's face, because number one, they probably don't understand enough about it, and two, their mind is just spinning on all the potential issues and liability that you're going to run into. So this presentation, just to keep it somewhat reasonable, we limited to data protection and privacy, IP, general liability, which I'll talk about in a couple of different contexts, and then just like broadly what it means for social and ethical considerations. So we're at the AI Center. I'm going to presume some foundational level of AI knowledge. If you don't have it, I recommend ChatGPT. It's pretty good at explaining itself. These large language models, right, they ingest lots of data. That's effectively how they're trained, to grossly oversimplify it. And so as someone utilizing an AI model that either you've trained on a custom data set, or if you're closer to the bare metal, like an OpenAI, you're using the entire contents of the internet to train your model, or you are an investor in a company that is utilizing these tools, what are the things you need to think about? And the first thing is the source of that data. So the internet, despite the fact that something is posted on the internet, you may not have unlimited rights to utilize that information, right? And I'll give you a boots on the ground anecdote here. Before OpenAI was even a thing and AI was barely on the horizon, I fielded a call from the general counsel at the time of CAA, which is a talent agency out in Los Angeles. And she's like, I've got an urgent problem from one of our clients who is deathly concerned that the entire contents of his life's work as an actor is going to be ingested by some AI, and effectively, by using these algorithms and fancy technology, spit out a movie that he didn't act in that is indecipherable from what he would have produced if he actually had acted in it. And I said, stop, you got to tell me who the actor is, because that's incredible that he's thinking about this and is that cool. I didn't learn about it until years later, but it was Tom Cruise. And so this is a guy who, you know, has an incredible body of work, and he was really thinking ahead, this conversation developed, and so he's been out there talking about this stuff as his CAA, and there's, you know, just so many fascinating issues that come up, right? Suppose, you know, there's enough clips of Tom Cruise running on the internet. That's like his big thing in the movies, right? He's got sort of an unusual gait when he runs. That you could absolutely AI generate a generic human running in the manner of Tom Cruise, right? Do you have the rights as the proprietor of that model to render that video, right? Is the data that you ingested, is it copyrighted in some way? Is there trademarked material that you're ingesting? And while that might not be your direct output, and it may have been a very small component of the weights that you're using ultimately to configure your output here, did that taint the final product, right? And these are all issues that that folks are having to contend with, that we don't have all the answers. This hasn't been fully litigated in the courts yet. We don't have any regulation really to speak of that would confront this stuff. So it's our job as attorneys, particularly my job, when I do a lot in the securities world, I've got to disclose the risks, right? Like part of what we do as investors is review those risk factors and potentially help companies draft them. And so when we have companies utilizing AI agents, or we have companies that are heavily involved in the AI space, there's always a question, where did the data come from? Even if you weren't the one who ingested it to the model and trained the model, did you utilize it? And does that somehow taint what you're doing with it? And if you own data, right? If you are a movie star, or you have a great big catalog of IP, or you're big in print media and you have online archives of your material, is your data privacy up to snuff, in the sense that are your license agreements and privacy policies sufficient to prevent these scrapers, which are going to do it instantaneously and automatically, from coming over your material and ingesting it? And so these are all questions we've got to confront. And so we'll get an inquiry, you know, I've got this situation, I'm involved in AI, how do I comply with the GDPR? Who knows, right? It's like, your guess is as good as mine. But we will sit down and try to figure it out with you, right? That's part of what our shtick is we confront difficult problems. I'm sometimes jealous of my colleague down the hall who does car accidents and slip and falls, and his day-to-day is relatively simple. It's like someone fell in a hole and twisted an ankle, he's a happy camper, you know? And we don't have that luxury on my side of the office. We are really at the forefront of a lot of difficult issues. I was telling one of our guests earlier that I, in the prior life in a blockchain world, was one of the first people to have to go before a regulator in California, no less, and explain about opcodes on the Bitcoin blockchain and how that affects custody and control of financial assets. I once had to go before a group affiliated with the FAA and explain anti-missile laser countermeasures to be affixed to aircraft. So like I've seen and done a lot of strange things, and part of what is so interesting about AI to me is I get to really put on my like problem-solving hat and dig into these issues and try to sort it out. So data privacy, it flows right into IP, right? Could your output be infringing just by virtue of something totally outside your control, something that Sam Altman did in the dark of night when he was building OpenAI, right? We're already seeing these lawsuits. Getty Images has sued Stable Diffusion. I don't know if you guys have followed this lawsuit at all, but essentially the question that the court is going to have to confront is what rights can be utilized in connection with this image generation. Whose rights are they, right? So if you generate an image, there's a famous case about this this monkey here, right, who took a photographer's camera and effectively took a selfie. And what happened? So PETA sues the photographer and says that this is actually the monkey's copyright. He was the author of this photograph. This happened. Okay, and this got all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the appeals court said, actually, monkeys are not humans and they can't have intellectual property rights. But what about AI, which you would argue is maybe even closer on the spectrum to a human than this monkey is? And so these issues are actively being sorted out. You're all probably familiar with the Turing test, right? This is not a legal analysis for you, but I would take the position that OpenAI has effectively passed the Turing test at this point. I interacted with it enough times. I'm a pretty smart guy. I'm not sure that I could always 100% of the time discern the two. And so if you have something that passes the Turing test, I would love to go in front of a jury and try to convince them that it gets intellectual property rights. I just think it'd be a fascinating thing to see happen. And these are the types of issues that we lawyers are going to have to confront. And so they're already happening in animals who are just one order of magnitude less conscious than us. What's going to happen when we have something that's an order of magnitude more conscious than we are, right? Liability. That's what everyone is afraid of. That's usually why you talk to your lawyer. It's like, how do I prevent whatever I'm doing from being completely derailed by lawsuits? How do I prevent having to pay out all these big judgments, right? There's a couple of different places liability comes into play. You, generally speaking, are probably familiar with the term product liability. If you have like a defective car, the famous one was the Ford Pinto. Every time it got like knocked and rear-ended, like just very lightly, it would explode into flames back in the day. Really bad product. You had airbags that in recent years were all considered to be defective, cause a lot of injuries. These are product liability lawsuits. These are things that people will bring against manufacturers of different products, services, et cetera. The question is, what about digital products? We're moving into a much more digital world. This is big in the blockchain space, where you have these smart contracts, which are sometimes subject to vulnerabilities. And the question is, can a developer ever be sued for product liability, right? And so what if you are an engineer working on AI, you've configured the weights incorrectly, and you have now a system that hallucinates everything as opposed to giving like real outputs. And somebody relies upon that in their work because they've paid you to do so and they have access to your model. And maybe you've even helped them train on a custom data set. Are you liable for that? I'll give you an interesting real world anecdote. I work with people who give loans to businesses and to folks who are backed by collateral, such as real estate. And one of the things that was being piloted was, can we input a whole bunch of data about a particular asset into a custom trained AI model and get an answer about whether this is an investable thing or a lendable thing, right? Whether this asset will support our credit assumptions. And they were like, just think about this for a moment. Can we do that? And I said, sure, you can do it, but let's just consider for a moment like what the possible risks are. Number one, right? We've got to confirm that this system's not hallucinating the answer on investability, because you have fiduciary obligations to your investors, right? They're paying you to underwrite these deals and determine if this is a good place to place their capital. If you're relying solely on a machine to do that, you've got some fiduciary duty concerns that we've got to work through. Number two, you've all heard of like equal opportunity lenders, right? You can't discriminate in certain ways when you're giving a loan. You can't, for example, determine certain neighborhoods are off limits or certain borrowers based on criteria like race or ethnicity or age are off limits. Can we be sure that the inherent biases that are in every AI model are not going to cause you to immediately run afoul of that issue? And then whose problem is that, right? Like, can we in contract, can we pass that risk to the AI company? Can we get some, what we call in our business, representations and warranties? And can we say, you're representing and warranting that this model is free from these implicit biases that would cause a problem for my use of this technology? And if that was present, who gets sued, right? Do I get sued by the government for being a discriminatory lender? Is it a defense for me to say, actually, no, my magic black box AI was the problem? We don't know, and these are all problems that we are confronting as attorneys. So what are some of the tools in like the toolbox that I utilize to try to solve some of these problems for clients? This is not, for example, something that we do day to day. These are still like fairly bespoke issues, but they do come up. And so your first question is indemnity, right? To the extent that you can, what does your agreement look like that gives you access to this technology? Is there some indemnity that we can secure that would give you some semblance or some security that if things go totally awry and you wind up infringing on an extremely costly piece of intellectual property accidentally, or if you violate some law due to implicit biases of AI, is there some protection from that exposure that you can have? We always try to negotiate those things. We always try to bring those things up. IP ownership, right? A lot of times if you read the fine print of contracts, you'll understand how we allocate risk over who owns what. Suspiciously absent from anything involving AI is any sort of representation about who owns what from an IP perspective. None of these companies can justifiably give you much comfort that what they have ingested into the model and what their outputs are not infringing. They just can't at this stage, partly because we don't know the scope of how the law is going to develop, and partly because it's, in many cases, impossible to tell why these models do what they do, you know, and it's, in some cases, not feasible to make those representations because you just don't have the visibility into the technology. We already talked about bias and discrimination. You know, this is something, again, we would try to handle in contract, but ultimately these are issues that exist, and all the paper in the world is not likely to be a perfect and impenetrable defense from liability in these circumstances. Licensing agreements are key, right? Typically, you are licensing access to AI technology unless you are building it in-house. And when you are licensing something, there's a whole host of considerations you've got to think about. The term of the license, the breadth of it, the licensed material, what your right to sub-license it is. Like if you are taking the output of an AI and putting it in your own deliverable and passing that off to a client, do you in fact have the right to do that under the license agreement? These are things that, because the uses of AI are so broad and so varied, it takes a lot of customization and a lot of attorney time to really make sure if you're going to commercialize some service or product utilizing this technology or the technology itself, that you are paying attention to these issues and trying to get some of this paperwork correct. For many companies, the exposure is a bet the company matter, right? So if you're a young startup and you've got concerns over whether your primary product is infringing on the rights of Getty Images, for example, you got a big issue here. Not only is your company potentially uninvestable to a lot of people in this room because of that risk, you have a potential major liability that has to get disclosed, number one. You have a potential major liability that, if pursued in a court, could effectively be the end of your company. So one of the things I always tell folks in very avant-garde areas, whether it's AI, blockchain, commercial spaceflight technologies, some of the forefront things in defense and privacy, you know, I'm a big corporate formalities guy. It's really easy to just go in Florida, swipe your credit card and spin up an LLC. The question is whether that's really going to compartmentalize the liability from you as an individual founder, right? And from your investors, who will never talk to you again if they wind up getting sued for what your conduct is, right? And so part of what we do at the firm is ensure that you're very buttoned up in this regard. This is not LegalZoom type stuff, right? You can't just kind of grab something off the internet and go with it. The risks are a little bit higher. The issues are a little bit more complex. And part of what we spend a good portion of our day thinking about is how do we minimize risk for you guys, and how do we minimize risk for the people you're investing in? And whether it's AI or some other fanciful technology, the issues are different, and we, you know, pride ourselves on trying to be roughly conversant in these different developments and see how it's going to pan out from a pure legal perspective. Last topic, and then I'll open it up to some questions, and we'll move on to the interesting presentations here, are social and ethical considerations, right? So we talked about implicit biases. This is something that, just by virtue of the folks who work in these companies, right? They're largely based in San Francisco, the United States. That probably caters to a certain demographic or a certain philosophy on life. Do those biases make their way into the models? You've already seen this happen with hot button political issues and the answers that a ChatGPT or a Claude would give. Meta has already gotten some flack in the public forum and discussion for the way it answers certain issues about philosophical differences of policy. And these are all real things that are happening. In my world, we have people, lawyers, who are utilizing things like ChatGPT to write court briefs. And one of my passions is blockchain, I was telling you earlier. And I used to be the author of Thomson Reuters' publication on regulations applicable to virtual currency. That was very easy to do when there was like 50 states and 4 regulations applicable to that technology. Not quite the case anymore. And so out of curiosity, I said, let me just plug some stuff into ChatGPT and get some legal citations on some of the latest developments. And it comes up with a US Supreme Court case declaring effectively Bitcoin to be a First Amendment protected activity because blockchain is speech. And I was like, that is incredible. How did I not know about that Supreme Court case? And then I started looking into it, and ChatGPT hallucinated it, right? That's not real. There was never a case like that. It never got before the Supreme Court. And the summary of the opinion, which was fantastic and cited, by the way, real First Amendment precedent that I learned about in law school, was totally hallucinated, no basis in reality. How long ago was that? This was 5 months ago, maybe not even, right? And so these are like, this is not for the 4.0 model, but I want to say ChatGPT maybe 2.0. So like, this is not like they just rolled it out. These are things that are really happening today, and these are things you got to watch out for. You are now having to certify as a lawyer, if you're a litigator in many courts around the country, that you are not using generative AI to write your briefs. We've had people in Miami-Dade County who have been subject to sanctions for filing briefs with hallucinated case law in it. So this is like real stuff. And I know we like to think about AI applications pie in the sky, and sometimes I tell my clients, like, you know, we gotta be practical about the risk. We could also disclose the risk of, you know, an asteroid killing the founder or the power grid going down, you know, but this is real stuff. And in my judgment, I think that the ubiquity of AI and how it's proliferating at an exponential scale is going to be a circumstance where you've got to be paying attention to this regardless of the industry you're in, just from a pure financial standpoint, right? So you don't get disrupted out of a business, but certainly from a legal perspective. And we're already seeing it. I encourage all of you guys to think about it. For many of you, it's probably not worth you know, a 6-figure retainer to your lawyer to sort out these issues, but for some people it has been. And we've uncovered some really fascinating things and some insights that I tried to give you a little teaser of here today. Part of what we've identified in our research is, number one, you've got the data set, right? So obviously these very large, well-funded AI companies can train data from effectively the entire internet, right? And so you think the sample size of the internet is good enough that you would have the ability to eliminate inherent biases in the data. That said, there are things behind paywalls that scrapers can't access. There are certain domains that are difficult to reach because of sanctions and other information or other circumstances like that. There are certain of these models that are so sophisticated that they'll actually read the privacy policy and determine if they're allowed to look at this information from an ingestion perspective. So you can have a limited data set. Then of course you have folks who are not using the entire internet. They may be training on past, for example, I said to my, let me talk with somebody about training a model on all the merger agreements I've done over the years and see if we can glean any interesting insights. Well, you know, I'm a primarily middle market guy. I've not done a bunch of big public deals in my time, nor have I done a bunch of smaller transactions. And so we may be limited in our data set. The other issue is the weights. And so the way that these models work is you have an input and you have an output. And the engineers who configure these weights and configure the internal policies, like you can't ask ChatGPT how to build a bomb, right? And that's because there are certain internal parameters that are set that limit, despite all of the knowledge, ChatGPT definitely knows how to build a bomb, but it won't tell you how to do it, right? And so the way that those are configured can lead to implicit or very obvious bias. And so like when I play around with ChatGPT, I love politics, I love to ask it about big issues, right? You will find that there's an absolute definite political skew to the answers you get out of things like Claude and ChatGPT and Meta's AI. I don't know why that is, but it could well be because you have engineers in California who put those weights together, right? It could well be that you know, the prevailing attitude amongst those people is that certain viewpoints are offensive as opposed to just less popular, right? Or dangerous as opposed to less popular. So the bias can creep in all sorts of ways. And that doesn't even leave the prompt point of view too, right? And so there's this wealth of knowledge in this data, but you have to prompt it. You have to prompt the AI to give you a good answer. And one thing that we found is we can get vastly different answers to the same question just by engineering the prompt a little bit differently. And so I think that you may be the problem, really. Like, I'm the issue here, right? I'm not getting these answers because I'm asking the question in a way that is leading, as an attorney would say, right? So it creeps its way into a lot of different places. I don't think it can be addressed solely by a larger data set, and I think it has to be more about the engineering. And the biggest area and what's going to be regulated, I think, for better or for worse, soonest is going to be the weights and the measures and the way that the internal parameters are configured. I think that open source models are more likely to be encounter less friction from a regulatory perspective, because there's always going to be a question about why this model is behaving in a particular way. And I think you could get a good guess out of Sam Altman why ChatGPT does a certain thing, but I'm not sure he could tell you that with total certainty. This stuff is really kind of unbelievably futuristic. So, and again, take this all with a grain of salt. I'm not an AI engineer, so this is just based on our research here, but that'll give you some idea where we think some of the bias comes from. And so this is actually something we've encountered from both sides, representing the companies raising the capital and from folks in your position. And the short answer is these issues are changing all the time, but the first thing we're always concerned about is the data. Where did it come from? What assurances can you give me that you had permission to access this stuff? What assurances can you give me that the output is not going to be, if I asked you to generate a logo for a computer company and you gave me an apple in all purple, right? It's like, is that going to infringe on Apple's trademark? Probably, right? Even though it's not a one-for-one copy. And so that's a very simple explanation, but the concern is always going to be the data, both on the ingestion side of it and on the output. The second thing is going to be, where actually is this technology coming from? Because what I've seen from an investor standpoint is this technology is proliferating. Anybody can spin up effectively a custom GPT, right? And they will sell these things as the next big thing, but you are entirely captive to the ChatGPT ecosystem. They shut that off because you violated some policy, your whole company is toast, right? And so that's really the second biggest area, is what actually, almost exclusively, yeah. And so what are you? Your company is effectively an API, right, at that point. And from an investability thesis, that's a real question for many of my clients. Even if many of these things are very profitable. I'll give you a ridiculous example. I got a guy who is running a ChatGPT for dating apps. If you don't want to like hang out on Tinder all day, his ChatGPT agent will do it for you, and it's far more effective than humans, at least in the markets they're testing it on, until something bad happens, right? And until someone says there's been some sort of assault or an allegation of something inappropriate, and it gets out that this person wasn't even the human talking to the victim, it was a computer, right? And then ChatGPT shuts it off. That company is gone, despite the fact that it's doing several $100,000 a month right now, right? So that's the other big concern: is the business case actually there, or is this literally just an API plugged into the more deep tech company? My contact information is here. I would love for any of you guys to reach out. As I mentioned, part of what we do is broad, right? I'm kind of the mad scientist of the group, but if you're selling your house or you want to enter into a lease, or you're an investor raising a fund, or you want to make an investment into something as simple as a safe or a convertible note, we do that too. In fact, that's some of the meat and bones that pays for our cool exploratory efforts to figure out blockchain and commercial spaceflight and AI. So I would love to introduce you to members of the team. I would love to get to know all you guys, and to the extent we can work together, we're deep in this space, and we're innovative problem solvers, as I know you guys are, and would love to talk about opportunities to synergize there.